Man, don't y'all smoke that shit. He just ride. Look, man, this crazy, man. I'm telling you. This fighting in traffic, bruh.
Nerdrotic.com.
Fellowship, friendly association, especially with people who share one's interests. I cordially dislike allegory in all of its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of the readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the proposed domination of the author. With Tolkien stories, what you see is what you get. There's no unreliable narrator, and the same goes for this channel. Nothing to decode here. When I say respect the lore, I mean respect the lore and nothing else. I didn't make the rules. Tolkien did. And if Amazon doesn't want to abide by those rules, then they will suffer the consequences, and I'll just kick back and say, I told you so. Now, we haven't seen a single frame of footage from Amazon's Lord of the Rings, and there's already controversy. We haven't even seen a production shot. Hell, we don't even know who is playing who at this point. I've already gone over all of the red flags, and to this very moment, the most concerning should be the showrunners, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, whose only experience is writing a horrifically bad Star Trek movie and being connected to the horrifically bad destroyer of franchises bad reboot. Just ask DC fans right now. We also had Tom Shippey leaving, the hiring of an intimacy coordinator, Jeff Bezos saying he wanted a Game of Thrones, and yes, we're going to get Lord of the Thrones or Game of the Rings. A source for a lot of that information was a website and a YouTube channel called Oneringnet, one that I have previously recommended to you guys. Well, a few days ago, they decided to put their virtual foot in their virtual mouth with a vacuous virtue signal. It's that time of year again where the corporations decide to remember and exploit the struggles of our friends in the alphabet community for profits, and it's no different for the Access Media, and more on that in a moment, whose currency is clout. It all started with this. Listen, we've been dealing with istophobic comments for decades, and it's still wrong. Whatever toxic arguments are being said now about the Lord of the Rings fandom and adaptations is the same trash that said Ian McKellen was the worst affront to Tolkien's legacy ever. What?
He needs somebody to spy with.
First off, while I didn't see every forum and every post, I damn near did because I obsessively followed news about this movie when there wasn't that much of it on a very young internet 2 decades ago, including the OneRing.net forums. In that admittedly unhealthy amount of time where I probably should have been paying attention to my job, I didn't see anybody complaining about who Sir Ian McKellen decides to spend his time with. What I did see was a lot of concern over what changes they were making from the book, but I did see a lot of complaining about Arwen, which we'll get back to. I put as much in a tweet, and the OneRing.net decided to respond with this: ignorance does not preclude fact. Ian McKellen, Sir Ian McKellen, wrote on the subject. And indeed he did, and it was just some guy who decided to point this out. Are you talking about this? Some chat rooms 20 years ago? Come on. No one thinks Amazon's show will suck because the actors might be gay. People think it'll suck because Amazon isn't going to respect the lore, which we'll get to in just a moment. We go to Sir Ian McKellen's article where he does discuss his personal struggles and his activism, and I did say maybe there was a couple, maybe a few. Nothing worth taking seriously. And again, nothing I saw. But if we go back to their original tweet, it said, listen, we've been dealing with istophobic comments for decades, not Ian McKellen. Make a baseless accusation without providing any receipts, throw the fans under the bus, all to get some cheap virtual attaboys. If they were actually about unity, they would have pointed out that Sir Ian McKellen is universally loved. He's a trailblazer, an inspiration, and he has made it easier for other actors in his line of work. Now, this is simply just a Twitter squabble, and normally I wouldn't make a video on this, but it does play into the bigger picture. What this does to fandom, what I have been warning about for the last couple of years, what I have seen happen to the Disney Star Wars fandom, to the Star Trek fandom, to the Doctor Who fandom, to the Marvel Comics fandom, to the DC Comics fandom, and fandom in general. Politics ruins everything. You may remember in my last video I mentioned the imposter, the poser, the tourist, the activist. What I didn't mention was the access media, because largely they are the activist and they will always out themselves. What's the first thing you think of when you hear something like respect the lore? Give you a little time to answer in the comments section below. Y'all done? Good. Whatever you wrote down is wrong. Obviously, it's a dog whistle. It's a coded message for white supremacy. When responding to just some guy when he said respect the lore, the Oneringnet said this: respect the lore, in quotes, is becoming coded language for racist perspectives on a text that never describes color.
You gotta be f***ing kidding.
Now, the Oneringnet just stepped into that one by accusing the very black, just some guy, of being a white supremacist, but you're not alone. See Mark Wade. Now, you also know, and just some guy pointed this out in his video, that's a disingenuous argument considering Tolkien has described the elves many times as fair, but that's the loophole Amazon is going to use. Now, do I think that The Lord of the Rings in 2021 is going to be lily white? No, that's not my concern. Never was. My concern is the story. What elements are you going to put in it? And are they going to align with what Tolkien has already mapped out in detail? And the answer is no.
Talking in a very advanced critical language, that The Lord of the Rings is over-coded because the megatext has to be constantly explained. Well, leave that aside. But it goes on to say, nor are the histories and genealogies in the least necessary to the narrative, but they have given much infantile happiness to the Tolkien clubs and societies. Well, that's just name-calling, infantile happiness. But when somebody says the histories and genealogies are not in the least necessary to the narrative, now that's dead wrong. That's not only wrong, that's stupidly wrong. Actually, what they give to the narrative is something which Tolkien was very aware of, and which he often talked and wrote about, and which he valued very much, and that is depth. So you don't just have, as it were, a flat, garish, shiny surface. You have something which has depth behind it, and a feeling that this is a world where you can ask a question about it and you'll get an answer. And if you ask a question about the question or a question about the answer, then you'll get more answers because it's all there already. And that gives you an illusion of reality. But the illusion has been deliberately created.
That's what makes the next statement on this roller coaster ride of stupidity equally absurd. There's an old saying that my dear departed pappy used to tell me every time I popped off: love you, Dad. Don't let your mouth write a check that your ass can't cash. And yes, they said Tolkien was woke. This is from Bounding into Comics. Let's hear their logic. If you still think Ian McKellen, that's Sir Ian McKellen, is the worst, no one does, and that Catholic Tolkien would have never approved, no one said that, I beg you to read more of Tolkien's books and letters. He was woke. So after they said Tolkien was woke, they said they wanted to realign the argument with me by asking me to define woke when I wasn't the one who brought it up on the Twitter thread. Then it went to respecting the lore as some sort of conservative argument. Like I said, politics ruins everything, and they're the ones who brought them up in the first place. Now, I can't say this is where the Twitter thread ended because it's going on to this very day, but this is when I stopped paying attention. When a blue check mark came in and essentially called Tolkien a racist and the fandom white supremacist, and the Oneringnet responded with, great thread.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
So what is he? Is he woke or is he a racist? You tell me. You're the experts. I'm guessing Tolkien was just a man of his time who felt out of time. He hated the combustion engine. He hated planes, trains, and automobiles. He loved nature, and he was a practicing Catholic. They will always out themselves. And how does the access media do it? by fan blaming. You know, it was just a few days ago they actually asked a good question. All this Cruella discourse about making a villain relatable has us wondering what they're going to do with Sauron for 5 seasons. As with all things, Sauron started out good, but by the Second Age, he wanted to be the God King of Middle-earth, where he takes on the appearance of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. And to do that, he wanted to seduce the elves into his service, and that can have a brand new meaning in 2021. There is thousands of years from the forging of the Rings of Power by the elven smiths of Eregion to the downfall of Numenor to the War of the Last Alliance, and Amazon can do a lot of damage, meaning a lot of room for identity politics, intersectional feminism, or dare I say even critical race theory. You know, now that I think of it, Sauron wanted to enslave Middle-earth, and that would be equity of outcome. Lord of the Rings is everything Hollywood and academia hate right now, and that hasn't changed. So you're starting to see sites who exclusively talk about Lord of the Rings having to go through mental gymnastics to figure out why they still like it, including coming up with hot takes like Tolkien is woke.
I think that one thing is that there's a kind of ideological opposition. That Tolkien, in a way, was sticking up for the past, and not just the far remote past, but also actually the near past. Perhaps we're going back to the First World War again. After the First World War, the dominant literary response to everything was irony. Now, Tolkien was capable of irony, but he did not actually write in an ironic mode. Actually, I think he was writing in a romantic mode. And that mode they thought had, that mode, should we say, the critics thought, the academic world thought, had actually been completely drained.
You may or may not know that the Second Age of Middle-earth doesn't have any wizards or hobbits, but that might be changing with Amazon's purchase of MGM, according to the Oneringnet. They now have full access to the characters within The Hobbit and The Hobbit itself, and there is rumors that we might see hobbits in this show, which sounds terrible. Worse yet, Amazon could remake The Hobbit. I'm sure the Tolkien estate over the years had turned down mountains of money when Christopher was around, but now that he's gone, well, it looks like all bets are off, and we'll probably get a remake of Lord of the Rings someday, so that female Gandalf played by Tilda Swinton is just around the corner. I'm no Middle-earth expert or scholar, but I have covered quite a few franchises being sacrificed on the altar of agenda, and Lord of the Rings is next. I don't remember the details exactly, but some of you may remember that images were leaked of Arwen fighting in the Battle of Helm's Deep. Now, I have no problem with the character Arwen in Lord of the Rings, but I would have had a problem with this, and a lot of the fans did. I believe it was the Oneringnet that leaked these images. Keeping that scene in would have destroyed Éowyn's story, and they made the right move, but you wonder what they would do today.
He needs somebody to spot with. I go spot with this. Look, this is crazy. He tired now.
Decode this. I want a story that is as true to Tolkien as humanly possible. I don't want anything added or changed. It's sacred text, but that's exactly why they want to change it.
They're coming.
So yeah, respect the lore. As far as I know, this Twitter thread is still going. Bless them. The Access Media is going to do what the Access Media is going to do. They're going to throw their softball questions up to actors and actresses who are going to forget them in 5 minutes, while occasionally throwing fans under the bus. And while it hasn't worked for their predecessors, maybe, just maybe, fan blaming will work for you this time. As far as I'm concerned, my integrity doesn't come that cheap. I have no desire to speak to an actor or an actress or a producer or a creative ever on this channel. I am perfectly happy hanging out with the people who know what they're talking about, or better yet, hanging out with new fans who are actually curious and want to jump in without destroying everything. I am perfectly happy sitting right here in my fellowship of fandom.
Nerdrotic.com. Please subscribe.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I'd like to shout out Lady Gravemaster, Just Some Guy, Bleeding Fool, and the Onering.com. Please check them all out. Everyone have a great day.